Hi, this is Steve Wagner, and this is a brief presentation on fundamental tactics of persuasion, and this is part one. So we're going to start out by just talking about what persuasion is, and then we're going to get into various tactics of persuasion. In part one, we'll talk about reciprocation, commitment and consistency, and social proof. In the second video, part two, we'll address liking, authority, and scarcity. To wrap it up in part two, I'll give you some references.
So persuasion is important because you want people to agree with you. You want them to agree with your opinion and your proposals. Persuasion is about getting people to say yes to your proposals. Now, it's important that you have well-reasoned proposals, well thought out opinions. However, just because you have a good idea that is logically sound doesn't mean that it's going to be convincing to other people. It doesn't mean that they're going to say yes to your proposal. There is a huge amount of research in the field of psychology that has identified tactics that you can use to get people to say yes to your ideas, to your proposals. So understanding and applying these tactics can help you to be more persuasive. But it's also useful to understand these tactics so you can recognize when other people are trying to persuade you. And you can look past these tactics of persuasion and look at the idea or the opinion itself and not get too caught up in the tactics of presentation. So let's look at the first tactic. It's called reciprocation. The basic idea here is that people feel an obligation to return favors performed for them. This is the basis of the exchange relationship between people. If I do something for you, you feel obliged to do something for me. So how can you put this into practice? Well, first off, all too often we ask ourselves, what can they do for me? Instead, you should be asking, what can I do for them? The advantage here is that when you initiate the exchange of favors, you get to set the tone. You get to set the ground rules. The best leaders often have a large network of people for whom they've done favors. And these people in return feel obliged to support that leader. It's important to remember that favors are more like bread than wine. What does that mean? Well, it means that favors are at their highest quality when they are fresh. That favors don't get better with time. Perhaps you've experienced this. Have you ever loaned someone some money and the weeks go by and they really forget about it? They don't think it's all that important. But for you, it probably gets more important over time, and sometimes that's very frustrating. So it's important to understand that favors don't age well. And so if we're looking for reciprocation, then we should initiate that exchange relationship actively. We should help each other, but we should expect that others should return favors in a timely fashion. Another thing to think about is that it doesn't have to be a big favor that you're doing for someone. Sometimes it's just a personal touch. Waitresses know this. When they give you your check, they put on a little smiley face or have a little note, "It's great to see you again." They know that by extending that personal touch, it's more likely that they'll receive personal consideration in return. So next time you deliver a report to someone, why not take a sticky note and add a little note that's a personal touch, and others will be more likely to extend you personal consideration in return. Another important thing to think about is that we often have a tendency to discount our favors. I hear myself saying this quite a bit. When I do something for someone, I'll say, "Oh, it was nothing. Forget about it." What am I doing to myself when I say that? I'm actually creating a sense of entitlement in the other person. My work is important to them. And it is important that we maintain an exchange relationship, that people do things for me just like I do things for other people. So instead of saying, "Oh, it's nothing, just forget about it," a better tactic would be, "Well, thanks. I know you do the same thing for me." What does that say to the person? That says that, I know you're a good person, and I know that you would give me a favor just as I did you a favor. So, three factors to consider when you're doing favors for other people. They're more persuasive when it's a significant favor, when it's something big. They're more likely to feel an obligation and return that favor. It's more persuasive when it's unexpected, when it's something that a person didn't even ask for, but you noticed that they needed some help. And it's more effective, it's more persuasive when there's some kind of personal touch, a little note, or just something that you say that shows them that it really comes from the heart. The next tactic of persuasion that I want you to think about is commitment and consistency. People want to act in a way that is consistent, and they want to be consistent with their commitments and their values. So what can you do to use this tactic to be more persuasive? Well, one thing you can do is when you're proposing an idea, you might ask people in advance whether or not they would support that initiative. Perhaps take a poll in a meeting or send out an email describing your proposal before you get too involved in it and see whether it's something that they would support. If they give you their initial support, they're more likely to support you down the road when you're actually enacting your proposal. Another good thing to do is get commitments in writing. And it's not so much to have a legal commitment from someone else. It's more that if someone makes an active commitment, if they actually have to say it aloud or write it out, they're more likely to want to be consistent with that action. Another thing to consider is that if you can get someone to make a small initial commitment, they're more likely to make a large commitment later on. This is called the foot in the door technique, and salesmen are very good at using this. They get you to buy something very small, and eventually you're more likely to buy a big ticket item. People who work for charities are also very good at this. They get you to make any contribution, however small it may be, and they know that it's more likely that you will say yes when they come back for a larger contribution. Another thing to think about is the values that people hold. So when you're trying to persuade someone, when you've got a proposal, you should invoke the values that are held by that person or their organization. This is a very good tactic when you're initiating proposals. You should frame them within the shared values that the college has. Now, what are you supposed to do when your proposal contradicts a previous commitment made by a person? Sometimes you're trying to get them to change direction. What you want to be careful of here is not to criticize their previous commitment. Okay, because again, people want to be consistent. They don't want to flip-flop one direction to the other. And so a good thing to do if you're trying to get someone to move away from a previous commitment is to avoid criticizing that previous decision. You might say, you know, given the information that you had at the time, that was a good decision. But here's new information that I think will be even more consistent with your values. Another tactic for persuasion is social proof. The idea here is that people look to what others do as a guide to their own behavior. So how can you use this to be more persuasive? If your position is supported by others, okay, especially a majority of people, then you should highlight that fact because it's more persuasive. There's a great book called The Wisdom of Crowds, and it expounds on this idea that when a lot of people support an idea, then we're more likely to look at that idea as a good idea. And oftentimes it is a good idea because it has been tested by a number of people. It's also important to highlight the similarity between the people who support your position and those people that you're trying to persuade. And so if you're trying to advance an idea, it would be a good idea to show that other educators believe that this is a good idea. Try and use testimonials to have people give a personal message about your proposal, your idea. This is especially effective if you can have those people who are giving your testimonials meet directly with the people you're trying to persuade. One thing to avoid is negative social proof as a persuasive tactic. This often backfires. So what am I talking about here? If you were trying to get more young people to vote, and you said that 75% of young people didn't vote in the last election, this probably wouldn't be a very persuasive message. It would actually tell young people that, hey, most people don't vote, why should I vote? Okay, so if you've got negative social proof, it's better not to highlight that fact.